Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by Trailtopia. We're on to episode number 60, and for that I'm reaching back to my class again, the class of 2014. I've got Stacey Bucklin, or Stylez, as my guest this week. Stylez, and I know you've heard me talk about this before, but Stylez is yet another of those astonishing, fiercely independent women I met on the trail. Meeting some of these women was an eye-opener for me, and Stylez adds a layer of nuance to my understanding of that group. Who knew I'd still be learning so much about women in my 60s? After scaring the pants off everybody last week with the horror stories about hypothermia, Dr. Lynn thought she'd step it up a bit this week by talking about frostbite. Remember, this is really not an issue for many people, so don't let it put you off going into the woods in the dead of winter. Just be prepared if it does happen, and Lynn's talks are really supposed to be informative and preventive. Thanks again to our title sponsor, Trailtopia, and I thought I'd share this with you. When I was hiking, I'd wake up to my alarm, deflate my AirPad and contemplate my blah breakfast. Every morning I poured water into those different coloured paper bags, scrunch around the ingredients, not one of which had any association with fruit, and then eat that soulless gunk. I then find unhydrated powder and sugar in the crevices of the bag. Trailtopia's blueberry oatmeal is a bit of a novelty because it actually has real blueberries. Who'da thunk? No gunk. It tastes great. The bag design ensures complete hydration and it really sets you up for the day. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. Ah, those mornings. I know that Trailtopia may be new to some of you, but if you've listened to our other show, Returning to Katahdin, you'll know that they are also sponsoring that show. Even better, for listeners to both shows, they're giving away 2 of their delicious meals in each show every week. All you have to do is email me at steve@mightyblueontheat.com, steve@mightyblueontheat.com, with a question for Bruce Matson, whose 2018 hike is the subject of Returning to Katahdin. Bruce is this year's Jesser. If you don't know what that means, you might want to listen back at some of our earlier shows. Bruce has got a great story to tell, so I hope that you listen to our new podcast. I'll be sharing the link to his show every Monday morning on Facebook. Of course, you can also subscribe on iTunes. That way, you'll automatically get every episode as it becomes available. Lastly, I'm a bit nervous about this. I start reading Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer, the granddaddy of AT hikers. All that is still to come, so let's get started with Stacey Bucklin. Okay, I'm on with yet another of my early classmates of the class of 2014. Her name is Stacey Bucklin, or I knew her as Stylez. Hi Stylez, how are you?
Hey, Mighty Blue, I'm great. How are you?
Mighty Blue. It still makes me laugh every time. Beans, I interviewed Beans the other day and he called me Mighty Blue the whole time. And I had to ask him if he actually knew my real name. So
sometimes you don't, you know?
Exactly, yeah. You meet these people and they are whoever they say they are on the trail, which is great. Now, we met on the trail quite early on, as I say, and you were in your early 30s when you hiked. I was in my early 60s. And that's normally, or your age was normally an age for careers and relationships. What propelled you first off to the Appalachian Trail?
Right, yeah, it is kind of a weird time to hike. And I met 1 or 2 other people in their 30s, but most people were either fresh out of college or high school or retirees.
That's right.
I had always wanted to do some grand adventure like that. I read a book when I was in, I think, high school called A Walk Across America by Peter Jenkins.
Uh-huh.
And it really doesn't have anything to do with the Appalachian Trail, although he does mention it. But it's just about a young man who's a little bit frustrated with the way his life is going and society and life in the city. And he kind of wants to explore America at a slower pace and get to meet some people that live in different places than he does and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what made me want to do the Appalachian Trail. And then I grew up in Austin, but I was living up in the Dallas area, going to school and working. And I moved back to Austin, and it was just the right time. I was able to move in with my parents. continue to work at my job and save up some money and then quit my job and go hike. And I came back and I got a better job. So, it's anyone that's thinking about doing this in the middle of their career, it's not a career killer by any means. I think it actually helped me get my job.
That's interesting. And I know a number of people I've spoken to found they came back to nothing, just literally nothing, and they had to restart their life all over again. But that can be daunting for some people. But you saw it as a challenge and just got straight into another job, did you?
Yeah, I actually put it on my resume and I framed it in ways about what I learned about myself and being independent and being driven and, knowing how to negotiate and do teamwork and that kind of stuff. And so I was able to weave it in. I think it was helpful, actually.
Do you think hiking at that age helped you to frame the things you learned better than it would have done had you done it straight out of college?
I think so. And I think having some work experience under my belt already and kind of knowing what it would take to succeed in a job and what employers were looking for probably helped too.
Sure. I mean, did you actually have a career path going at the time, or was this something, because you said that the book was about somebody who was frustrated with his life or his job. Were you feeling a frustration about that, or you just wanted to do the big adventure?
I think both. I was a little bit, I felt like I was in a bit of a dead-end job at the time, and I wanted to try something completely different. As far as a career path, I've never really had a clear one, and I still don't. I've kind of been all over the map. I straight out of grad school, I was making $9 an hour as a zookeeper. Then I went to work for a company marketing department. Then I worked for a science museum in the education department. And then I worked for an advertising agency. Then I hiked the trail, and now I work for a tech company.
Wow.
So
wow.
It's been all over the map.
Which one do you like the best? And don't say hiking the trail. It probably is hiking the trail.
Of the actual paying jobs, I liked working at the science museum the best.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you do much research prior to heading off to Springer?
I did. I have a bit of an addictive personality, so I became kind of obsessed with it and was reading blogs all the time, reading as many books as I could get my hands on, researching gear and watching videos. So I did a ton of research as far as what the trail would be like and gear, but as far as trying to plan what I was going to do day to day, I knew that was not going to work. So I kind of went out there with no plan, but I had done a ton of research beforehand.
So you knew how you expected to react, but you get faced with so many different things, don't you? From the very first day on the trail, everything is so new to you that you just kind of have to make it up as you go along, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah, you just have to trust yourself and just put yourself out there and see what happens.
Yeah, and when you screw up, you don't do that thing again. And then you screw up at something else, and you don't do that thing again. So that's why that's the way we all learn, isn't it? Really.
Exactly.
Did you seek out a hiking partner, or were you just happy to start by yourself?
Personally, I was quite happy to start by myself, but being a single female trying to go out there alone, my family and my friends were concerned, and I don't necessarily blame them. They wanted me to either carry a gun, which I was not going to do, but I get that question all the time.
Every single time.
Every time. Yep. Or they wanted me to find somebody to hike with, and so I went on to whiteblaze.net.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still the website, but it was at the time, which is a great forum for Appalachian Trail hikers.
Right.
And I found two girls that were also running into the same objections from their family and friends. So we decided to hike together, but that only lasted about a month. The first girl quit after the first night on the approach trail, and then I lost track of Twist after about a month. She went off to Asheville, and I kept hiking.
Oh, so Twist was hiking with the other girl who quit on the approach trail?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, my gosh.
It was the three of us at first, yep.
Now, that is being let down, isn't it? Pretty quickly. Oh, my God.
There were warning signs, but
really?
It's not for everybody.
How did you feel being out there as a single woman alone? Because even though you were hiking with people, you were still a single woman alone. How did you feel ever insecure or unsafe out there?
I don't remember ever feeling that way. I mean, yes, I was alone, but from being out there, there were hundreds, if not thousands of people out on the trail. Yeah. So especially at the beginning, there were always tons of people around, almost too many people. So I never really felt that way. When I got up to the northern parts of the trail, there were times when I would camp just by myself, and
I was going to ask you
that.
Scared
of.
I was going to ask you that. Did you camp by yourself away from a shelter then?
Most of the time, yes. I was more comfortable doing it that way, but I never really felt scared. I mean, sometimes I hear weird animal sounds in the night, but I never felt scared that a human was going to do anything to me.
We've said this on the show several times, or I've said it, that there is an irrational sense of safety once you zip yourself into your tent, isn't there? I mean, it's the thickness of, I don't know, 1 millimetre or less than a millimetre of material. And yet I always felt totally safe inside my tent. I never felt threatened by animals, even when I heard them outside.
Right. If you can't see them, they can't see you, or they're not going to hurt you, right? But
quite right, too.
Another thing about that, though, is a lot of the spots in the Appalachian Trail, like if you're going to get out, if somebody's out to get you, they're going to have to be really committed to hike out into the mountains to try to do anything bad, you know? Yeah. I was more worried when I was camping near a road, but in general, I felt very safe.
Yeah. It is definitely a thing to think about for women, but as you say, I mean, you'd really need to be wanting to do some harm to have to hike into the mountains to get somebody. So it's nothing to reasonably worry about. Now that explains to a degree that your mother was following my blog for some reason, and maybe because you didn't keep yours up, but she followed my blog and she made several comments. What did she think of your adventure itself then? Was she behind you, even though she was nervous about it, but was she supportive of you on the trail?
Both my parents were incredibly supportive. I think they would have both, before I hiked, they would have both rather me not have done it, but they knew that my mind was made up, and so they were very supportive. And I think what really helped them, and I don't necessarily recommend this, it's not very practical, but my parents, they saw me off at the beginning of the trail. They visited me twice while I was hiking, and then they picked me up at the end.
All right.
So they got to meet a bunch of fellow hikers and see, there wasn't a bunch of crazy people out there. It was people that had jobs and families and things like that. And that helped put their mind at ease a lot. Yeah,
I'm sure. It definitely is a mindset. And I don't think any of us really know what we're letting ourselves in for when we get out there. But to let our loved ones know that we're safe and it is a really important thing. I actually was able to call my wife on the phone every single day but one. So had to have that contact where you can speak to somebody because of the accessibility and how close we were to quite a few roads quite often. We were rarely in the wilderness until the 100-mile wilderness, but by then we were nearly at the end. So, it was we could always get off quite easily.
Yeah, and I didn't have a very good cell phone reception, actually. I had AT&T and a bad phone, but I carried one of those Spot GPS devices.
Oh, right.
I only turned it on at night, and I would send a signal every night.
Right.
And knowing that my parents weren't worried helped me to be a little, less preoccupied by that. And the only times they didn't get a signal were 2 times out of the 6 months I was out there.
All right.
So that helped a lot.
Well, funny enough, and I've heard this from so many people that AT&T's used us on the trail. I had AT&T, and I was able to phone my wife literally every day but one. It was never, hardly ever at any shelters. But it was nearly always when I was at the top of a mountain. But I would leave my phone on until I knew I had a signal because it would ping. And as soon as I did that, I would phone her. And so I still think AT&T is accessible, though everybody else tells me it's completely inaccessible.
Yeah, I guess your mileage may vary, but I also had a bad phone. And I wasn't nearly as dedicated as you were.
So let's talk about those early days. This cracks me up, this does. Now, you fairly quickly got the trail name Stylez. Would you care to explain that at all?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about it. It's a funny story. So, like I said, I did a bunch of research on gear before I started my hike. And I had this idea in my head that I was going to be very modest on the trail. And so I heard about this device called a pee-style, which is called a female urinal, or just basically a funnel that you can put in your pants so you can pee like a guy standing up. You don't have to pull your pants down on the trail. So rather than saying, I'm going to go use the bathroom to my friends when I left the trail, I would say, I'm going to go use my pee-style. And so that's how I got my trail name. But I didn't actually end up using the pee-style that much because when you're around people for so long and you haven't showered and you're disgusting, you don't really care so much if somebody sees your bum when you go into the bathroom. You lose your modesty pretty quickly. So I went at home.
Oh dear, that was so funny. I don't know what you remember. You actually gave a demo, a dry run, as it were, one night, and showed everybody
a dry run for sure.
Yes, exactly that. Oh, it was so funny, Stylez. I always think of that name. And I believe you got an injury quite early, and I only actually know that because we spoke before. How did your injury happen?
Yeah, it was very early on in the trail. I think the third day, and I know other people got hurt doing the same thing. The weather wasn't good, and we were trying to make it over Blood Mountain to get down to a hotel that night.
Yeah.
And it was sleeting and windy, and it was more miles than I think we should have attempted that day. But because there was the beer canister rule on Blood Mountain, we didn't
I
have
forgot
that.
about that. Yeah, I forgot
Remember
about
that?
Yeah, I do now, yeah.
Yeah, so it forced us to keep going, and so I hurt my knee going downhill. I don't know what exactly I hurt, but I ended up wearing a brace for a couple months after that. Eventually it did heal, but it bothered me for quite a long time.
Wow. Because you used to be, I seem to remember you told us you were a ballerina in a previous life, you did ballet anyway in a previous life. Had you put your knees under strain all your life? And was that part of it?
I had. Yeah, I think... But I'm not used to carrying around 35 extra pounds. You know, I think that's what did it.
Yeah, there is that, of course. Yeah, is that how much your pack weighed?
About that much in the winter, early on.
Wow.
With water and food.
Now, like several previous guests, you became part of the Big Trail family, or one of the Big Trail families. We've had Muffin Man, Wing It, Tigger, and Beans. Was that a deliberate step, and were you looking for a family, or did it just evolve and you kind of liked the way it felt?
One of the things I was looking forward to the most on the trail was meeting a trail family, but I didn't really have any ideas of what that would look like.
Yeah.
But I think it was kind of a natural thing. We were all roughly the same age. Maybe I'm flattering myself saying that. I was a bit older than them, but we're roughly the same age. And we got along, and for a while we were hiking the same pace, but eventually I became one of the slower hikers. One, because I'm just a slower hiker, but also I like to look around when I'm hiking and not just blaze through and miss everything around me. So I ended up hiking with some of the slower hikers after about a month or so.
I didn't realise you were one of the slow ones. I thought you were one of the early ones. I thought you always went off early. Or were you going off early because everybody was catching you up?
Exactly. We got up early, but we were slow. That's why we had to get a jump on everybody.
All right. Now, and what happened? It split up, and because you were slower, or you found a new trail family, and was it? I mean, is it the social part of it for you? It certainly was for me when mine was more safety, but I loved the fact that we were seeing so many beautiful things the last 500 miles, the people I travelled with, that to be able to see those things with other people was a bonus. To be able to see some of the sites we saw in New Hampshire and Maine, if I'd been by myself, I think I would have been disappointed by it, to be honest with you. So I'm glad I became part of a trail family. So for me it was partly security, and it was partly the fun of being with other people. How did yours actually break up?
I think we were in Hot Springs, and the plan was everyone was going to get up. It was Easter weekend, so I think it was that Monday after Easter, everyone was going to get up and leave town. And I think Wing It and Bluebird and I were the only ones that actually did. We hiked the same pace, so we hiked together for about maybe 50% of the trail. It was quite a big chunk, the three of us, and we would bump into the other people here and there, but it became a much smaller group, which of course is easier. You show up to a shelter and you don't have 12 people, you just have 3, and getting a hotel and all that stuff is much easier with a smaller group.
Yeah. Well, I think the last time I actually saw you was in that little town, Roan Mountain, and it was with Wing It, I think, and maybe Bluebird as well. I was so excited to see you all, I jumped out of the car that I'd got to lift down the mountain. I left my flipping poles in there, and I never saw them again. I was gutted about it. I really was absolutely gutted. And so generally the trail family you had then had split up. Did you become part of another group for the rest of the trail, or did you stay with Wing It and Bluebird pretty much most of the way?
I stayed with them until Pennsylvania, and then I ended up hiking with some other people. And then up in Maine, the group I was with, they had to finish earlier. My parents, like I said, they wanted to meet me at the end of the trail, but they needed to finish earlier than I did. So I hung back and I waited for Tigger, who I had hiked with at the beginning of the trail. and her friend Landslide, and I finished with Tigger and Landslide.
That must be nice to finish with people you actually knew. Some people I know, they went up by themselves, and I think that would be sad. It's such a tremendous moment to share, isn't it, when you actually get to the top there, and to be able to sort of high five other people you've hiked some miles with was a great feeling for me anyway. I'm sure it was with you.
Yeah, I was really lucky that I got to finish with people that I knew.
What day was it? When did you actually summit?
September 24th.
Oh, you're about 5 days ahead of me. Yeah, I was pretty damn slow as well. So now this is one of the strangest things about you. Is you really love snakes, don't you?
I do. Yep, I have 4 right behind me.
Oh, you've got them in the house.
Yep.
So where's that come from? Really?
I think I was born with it. My grandmother was always into creepy crawlies, and I was born in Florida, so I got exposed to that a lot. But I don't know. It's just something in me. I love the misunderstood creatures, spiders and scorpions and all that kind of stuff.
Scorpions are not misunderstood.
Until you ask.
Well, that's fair enough, yeah. So, but snakes, I know you were actively looking for them, weren't you? And you wanted to pick them up and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's funny. One time I was hiking with Wing It, but he was a bit behind me, and I found a garter snake, and I grabbed it, and it was biting me, and I was bleeding. But I wanted somebody to take my picture with it, so I stood there on the trail with the snake biting me for, 5 minutes, and then he never showed up, so I figured this isn't worth it. I let it go.
Oh, dear. So you say you've got 4 in the house now?
I do, yeah.
I presume you move out your parents' house by now?
Yes. Yep, I just bought a house, so they have their own room.
So the snakes are in some, what do you keep them, an aquarium or whatever it is you keep snakes in?
Yep, they're in aquariums. But
you don't let them out at all, do you?
I don't let them free roam the house, but I take them out.
Oh, God. Oh. I always say that, I don't care how tough you are. If you see a snake, you're going to jump. But apparently you don't. So you seem to be quite happy with them. Now,
yeah. One
of the things that's such a thread that runs through my mind on the AT was meeting some of these, and this is not being rude to you, but you're one of the fiercely independent women that I met on the trail. And it was striking to me how fiercely independent you girls were. And your generation appears to have a far clearer idea of your status than your parents did. Were you aware of this representation and generational shift when you were out on the trail, or did you already know that in real life? Because it was so apparent to me on the trail, I'd never really noticed it.
Yeah, I know that I'm a very independent person, sometimes to a fault, but when I was out on the trail, I didn't notice that I was any different than anybody else, and maybe that's because the trail attracts that type of person. And
yes, I wondered that. If
you're not independent, you're going to drop out pretty soon.
I did wonder that, but what I noticed, and some people seem to doubt this, but I noticed when I started, and I'd love to know what you think about this. When I started, it was about 75, maybe 80% men and 20% women, about that sort of ratio. But when I finished, it was nearer to 50-50. Far more men dropped out than women dropped out. I nearly all of the women I met and started with or ran into on the trail, nearly all of them finished. So I was checking finishes at the end, obviously. And there are so many women who finished, and yet a hell of a lot of men I met on the trail who just didn't make it to the end. And I wonder why it was that these women would come out on the trail, most of them by themselves, and feel entirely comfortable out there and basically kick ass on the trail.
I don't know. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I met some women in their 70s, and they were out there doing it too. So
yes,
I don't know.
Yeah, but your generation certainly has the upper hand on the generation behind you, or ahead of you rather, in terms of the independence that women have these days, which is great to see. As I say, I regard them as fiercely independent and a wonderful thing, something that was totally outside my experience. So for me, that was a great thing to see. So what has this achievement meant to you in your post-trail life? Have you done anything with it apart from putting it on your resume, of course?
Apart from talking about it every single day and annoying my friends probably to no end.
Their eyes glaze over, don't they, after a while?
Yeah.
You either have to find new friends or talk about something else, don't you?
Yeah, there was always somebody to talk to about it. But I don't. I'm very proud and happy that I did it. I'm glad that I was able to take a break from my career and do something that I really wanted to do. And I think if anything, it just makes me want to do something like that even more. I think there's so much more to life than just sitting behind a desk and making money. But in my situation, and I think in most people's situation, that's something that I have to do.
Yeah, of course.
And maybe I can save up some money and do another adventure. But the community, the sense of community and the goodness of humanity that I experienced out on the trail, I've not been able to find that anywhere else. So I would love to get immersed back into the hiker trash culture as soon as I can, just to get a little bit of a recharge and a refresh.
Isn't that an amazing thing, though? That feeling of how friendly people can be. And I've probably talked about this in the past on the show, that I think that a lot of the bad press that the hikers seem to get, even these latest classes, 2016, 2017, is nearly all on social media, and that only ever emphasises the negativity. And I found everybody I met on the trail, pretty much everybody, to be uniformly friendly, helpful and respectful. I didn't find anybody I fell out badly with at all. I had a few words with a couple of people, but generally everybody got on well, didn't they?
I think so. And also, even not the people that were hiking, the trail angels and people you met in town, everyone was just overwhelmingly generous. And you don't see that a lot. I think in modern society, people tend to close themselves off and not show their vulnerability or offer to help people. And that is just very abundant out on the trail.
Yeah. I always put it down to the fact that everybody wants, almost everybody wants your success as much as they want their own success. You know,
Exactly.
they want to see you get to the end as well, and I think it's great. Now, and do you think it's going to influence you rather in any future career choices? I know when we spoke, you said there was something you wanted to do, which was relating to the outdoors. Is that something that's forming more in your mind?
I mean, if I could find a job that paid well enough where I could be in the outdoors or teach people about the outdoors, I would love that. But in my free time, I'm what's called a master naturalist, a Texas master naturalist. So we're basically glorified volunteers for Texas Parks and Wildlife. And so I get to teach kids about nature and getting outdoors and animals and science and that kind of thing. So I do that a lot more in my free time as opposed to my work time. But if I could marry those two things together, I think that would be great. But if not, I'm happy splitting it up into making money and then pursuing my passions on the side, which I think it's a realistic compromise that a lot of people have to make.
And so the great adventure was what it was. It started with, and now it's now become a passion you want to explore more, possibly later in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
And I'll dabble in it on the side until I can get there.
Yeah. Do you take your snakes with you to show the kids?
I have before, and it's funny. Every time I see my 5-year-old nephew, he asks if I have my snake with me. I'm like, I don't carry him around, but yeah, I love teaching kids about them.
He'll surprise him one day. Just pull it out of your handbag.
He would love it.
I'm
He's
sure
scared
he would
too, but he would love it.
So, do you ever think you can always go out into the wildlife? You can always go on a hike for 5, 6, 7 days, but a through hike is a real commitment, isn't it? So, do you ever think there's another long distance hike in you anywhere?
If you would have asked me when I finished the Appalachian Trail, I would have said absolutely not.
Same here. I said I'd never hike again.
And not because I didn't love it. It was the best experience of my life, and I can honestly say that I didn't really have any bad days. It sounds like a lie, but it's true. Mm-hmm. Not every moment of every day was good, but every day was good. I finished the trail. I'd been hiking for 6 months. I was injured. I was tired. I just wanted to take a break. But now I'm itching to do another through hike. I'd love to do the PCT in the next few years. Yeah. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I would love it. I feel like you don't get the same experience in a week-long hike as you do when you're hiking for months on end. With,
and also you've got your
on
hiker
and off
legs.
with the same people.
When you're doing a through hike,
Exactly.
you've got your hiker legs. I was talking to a section hiker this afternoon, funnily enough, for the show, and she said that the only problem with section hiking is that you never get your trail legs. That must be horrendous.
Yeah.
Because it was agony for me for about the first 200 miles. It was a bloody nightmare. I was in all sorts of trouble for just forever, and then suddenly you find your legs working for you. Towards the end, I was almost literally flying up mountains, but then again, I was 60 pounds lighter than I was when I started, so that kind of made a difference. I heard you said just now that you got injured. I know you said you hurt your knee. Was that bothering you all the way to the end?
No, luckily that was probably half the trail though. I injured my chest actually coming down from Katahdin. We were coming down the knife's edge, and I just must have done something wrong. And I took my two hands and I tried to pull myself through two boulders.
Right.
I must have moved just the wrong way, and I strained or pulled something in my chest. And so I couldn't use my arm very well. I mean, it was fine. I didn't have to go to the doctor or anything like that, but it was kind of insult to injury. My hip was hurting me and stuff, and I was just ready to be done.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. You definitely get beat up. And my wife says to me, she says I was broken when I got back, physically broken, and I couldn't run upstairs for about 6 months. I lost all my toenails and all the feeling in my toes, and you just have to recover from that. And it is a physical exertion. And something else you said, which I totally agree with. I don't think I ever had bad whole days. At the end of every evening, I would be lying in bed or lying in my tent thinking that was pretty damn good overall. I always wanted to get up in the morning, and I was ready. It took me ages to get ready to go, but I was always happy to be out there and really enjoy being there. Mm-hmm. Well, look, it's been lovely catching up with you. You've been, I've always wanted you to explain your P style on my show anyway, and it was one of the funniest things I saw on the trail actually, and I'm so glad that you got to the end and you enjoyed it, and it still stays within you as it does with everybody else who's been out there.
Yeah, it's a once in a lifetime experience.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to do it again. I'll tell you. I did go back on the trail for a week actually. Funnily enough, this year, and I did 70 miles or 67 miles, and it was just beautiful just to be out there, and you get back the rhythm of your hike. But once again, it was the problem of getting your trail legs. So section hike. Anyway, lovely to catch up with you, and hopefully we'll talk again someday.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
All right, Stylez. Cheers then.
Bye.
Bye. You're going to get a gun? It is incredible how many times I was asked that. Stylez got asked it as well. It's safe out there, I really promise you. It was great talking with her again. She's very clear in her responses. I really liked how she was able to draw positives from every single day. She didn't have any bad days on the trail. I think that applies to a lot of us, but I hadn't really considered it like that before. And her dry run of the P-style just had to be seen. It was hilarious. Funny what you see in the woods, isn't it? Moving on to DocSpot and the wonderfully clinical Lynn Savino. She's doubling down this week with frostbite after hypothermia last week. I've got to say, I learned so much to my shame from these two conversations. I also think that she's doing a great job at explaining when I ask her my dumb questions. Someone's got to ask them. It might as well be me. Here's Lynn. Now we're back with cold weather part 2. This is Lynn again. Hi Lynn, how are you?
I'm warm and toasty.
It's a good way to be, because after last week's episode with hypothermia, we're now moving on to frostbite, which I thought was an impossibility. But then Lynn reminded me that people go hiking all year round. And, it's not just people going through the summer on the Appalachian Trail. There are times you can get frostbite. And she's got a few things that surprised me. So let's talk about frostbite then, Lynn.
Okay, sure. So frostbite actually occurs when your skin and underlying tissues actually freeze. We have water in our cells, in the skin, in the muscle, and in the blood, and water freezes and then becomes ice crystals. This can actually cause permanent damage to the skin and deep tissues of the body.
Does it freeze? It's not meant to be a stupid question, but does it freeze at a different temperature than normal water would freeze because it's in your body, or is that Is that not an
No,
issue?
it freezes at the temperature that water freezes at.
Oh,
and
right.
That's why you get frostbite, if you think about it, on the tip of your nose, on your earlobe, your fingers, or your toes. Those are the most common places to get frostbite because they're the ones that are exposed to the cold much more easily than your chest.
So it's more likely to be from extremities, basically, what you mean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's usually caused by exposure to the cold, but it can also be due to touching something that is frozen, like ice, a cold metal. That can transmit the cold temperature to the fingers very quickly.
Tell me about the patient you told me about who got frostbite in their basement, wasn't it?
Yeah. I had a woman who came to my office, and basically what was happening is she was walking around in her basement, which has a concrete floor, subterranean, without shoes, barefoot. In the middle of the winter, she was doing some laundry. And she was folding laundry for maybe about 20 minutes, a half an hour. Didn't realize it. She wound up getting frostbite on her toes. Fortunately, it was what we call superficial frostbite, and she completely recovered. But it's amazing how you, just by touching something cold for a long enough period of time, you can actually potentially do permanent damage to your feet or your hands.
Okay.
So it's important to be very aware of what you're actually holding, not just the temperature.
Okay. And like hypothermia, there are different stages of frostbite as well, aren't there?
Yes. There's one that I think sounds kind of cute, but it's a warning sign. It's called frost nip. And that is the first warning sign that you could potentially be in for some actual frostbite.
Right.
Most of us, believe it or not, have probably had this at one time or another. And fortunately, we've been able to warm up without even knowing what was going on. Your skin becomes very pale, or it turns red, and it feels very, very cold. You might develop feeling of prickling or numbness in the area. And then once the skin starts to rewarm, it may actually feel painful and tingling. But fortunately, there's no permanent damage at this stage.
And this is distinctly different to hypothermia.
Yes. This is only in the fingers, the toes, the ears, the nose, sometimes the cheek. Sometimes it could be an exposed area of skin, for instance, the back of a leg if it's exposed. If your sock is down and your pant leg is up and you've got, exposure to very cold weather, that part of the skin could actually develop frost nip or frostbite.
Right.
But it generally is the extremities.
I'm reading all the warning signs here actually ahead of you because I've got this list that Lynn sent to me. I've had all of these things, so I think I have had frost nip at some stage or other.
Oh, yes. As I said, if anybody who's been out in the winter for a prolonged period of time has probably had some element of frost nip. But then if you don't warm up, the next stage is what we call superficial frostbite, and that's where now you're starting to form ice crystals. The surface of the skin appears mottled, which is like a combination of red and white. It could be blue or purple, and you'll feel stinging, burning, or even swelling. Because if you think about it, ice, when water freezes and becomes ice, it actually expands, so you will see some swelling. After it's rewarmed, blisters could actually form about a day or two later. And then
Why would that be?
Okay, so what's actually happened is because you've expanded the cells with the ice, and now the ice has now melted.
Right.
You've stretched that part of the body. For instance, a finger. Let's say you have frostbite on your finger. That's now been stretched by the ice, and now the ice has now returned back to water, resorbed, but the skin itself is still stretched, and it's been damaged. Frostbite is not just ice crystals forming, but the result of the ice crystals forming cause a chemical reaction in the cells and bring inflammatory components to that area, which cause swelling.
Okay. And then there's the real thing.
Deep frostbite, which is what we see, in the news when somebody's been rescued, being in an ice cave for a couple of days.
Yeah.
That affects the deeper layers of the skin and sometimes the underlying muscle. Concern here is you actually now lose all feeling of cold and pain in the area. And that's because your nerves are starting to be damaged, so they're no longer functioning as pain receptors. Your joints or muscles may no longer work, and then you really start to get large necrotic blisters after rewarming.
Do you do any permanent damage at that stage to the nerves? In other words, do you then get your feeling back or not?
It depends on how bad the damage is. There can be a permanent nerve damage, yes.
Wow.
So if you think you have frostbite, the first and foremost thing is to try to get out of the cold as much as possible, protect the skin from further exposure. If you've got frostbitten fingers, put them under your armpits, okay, or on your abdomen. Those are areas that are very, very warm, much better blood flow, and that will help warm them up.
Right.
If you have a frostbitten earlobe or nose, and your hands are not frostbitten, then you put your warm hand on the nose or on the earlobe to try to warm that up.
Okay.
Important, do not rub the area, just cover it. Cover your hands or cover your face. Because if you rub the area, you may further damage the already irritated skin and the tissues underneath.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Very important.
I tell you what, Lynn, I'm listening to this as I was last week, and I had no idea about any of this. It's kind of shocking to me that I exposed myself to the potential of some of this, although I suspect not frostbite as you say, as we said before, for a through hiker. But certainly if I had ever gone hiking in December, I'm really exposing myself, aren't I?
Yeah, so it's important to make sure that you take good precautions. But, the body is very resilient. And again, these are guidelines. These
sure.
are what, these are the best, what we call best practice.
Sure.
Some people, may get away with, running or as we talked about last week, exercise. But research has shown that this is the best practice for treating and maintaining health.
So you don't rub the area, which makes a lot of sense to me, because as you say that the skin has been damaged already. Then you talk about taking off your wet clothing.
Yeah. Make sure if there's any wet clothing, take that off, because again, like in hypothermia, that's going to just worsen your heat loss.
Okay.
You can take pain medication. This is one where ibuprofen actually works. Yep. This is a good place for ibuprofen.
We knew we'd get you around.
And as I said before, one of the problems that happens with frostbite is you get inflammation, you get inflammatory chemicals, so you want to get rid of those. So it helps with the pain, and it helps reduce your inflammation.
Right. So how do you warm up then? How do you re-warm? You've taken off your wet clothing, you got out of the cold and stuff. How do you actually warm up?
Okay. So one of the ways that you can do this, even on the trail, is what we call a warm water bath. And this is not a hot water bath, very important. Again, a warm water bath where you gently immerse the frostbitten area, let's say the hand, into a cup or a bowl of warm water.
Right.
But the thing is that you have to do this for about 15 to 30 minutes before you can safely say that the frostbite has been rewarmed.
Wow.
And
you're effectively sorry I'm interrupting you because I'm fascinated in this. So you're effectively putting it in the warm water, not hot water, to actually literally thaw the ice.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
This may be a little tricky in the backcountry because you have to start a stove, you have to heat some water, and you have to heat it not to boiling. You have to heat it to body temperature. So that means you have to test it. Anybody who's ever had a kid that they've had to bathe, you dip your elbow, in the warm water to check. But you have to keep this going for 15 to 30 minutes.
Wow. As
your hand warms up, it will actually, the water will actually cool, so you have to continue adding a little bit of warm water all the time. So it's, again, going to take a lot of fuel, going to take a lot of water.
Okay.
But it is very effective to help prevent further damage and permanent damage from the frostbite.
Okay.
But it's also important to do this when you're not going to re-expose the area to more frostbite.
Okay.
If you're in a shelter or if you...
sure. Yeah, it makes sense.
Something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So you've taken your ibuprofen. Yeah. What happens next?
Taking your ibuprofen.
Yeah.
You also make sure that you don't rewarm the area with direct heat. Like, don't put it up next to a fire or a stove, because you may not be able to feel how hot it is, and you may actually burn your fingers
I'm sure.
or your toes. So if you're going to rewarm it, do that warm water bath, not direct heat.
Right.
If you have very severe frostbite, you don't want to walk on the foot or use your hands to climb or something because, again, pressure like that, just like rubbing, will further damage the tissues.
Obviously, yeah.
But you can bandage the area to help protect it.
Okay.
And the best thing to do is to...
prevent it again, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, the best thing to do is to try to prevent it, dressing appropriately. Very similar to preventing hypothermia. Lots of layers. Make sure you have a hat that covers your ears. I see so many people hiking in a baseball cap or skiing in a baseball cap in the winter. And that's not good. You need to protect your ears. So a hat or a headband that can cover the ears is really, really important.
I used to sleep in my woolen hat with pulled right down over my ears and over my nose. It cuts out all the light as well, so it was a double whammy. I would look frightening if anybody had seen me in the middle of the night, I'll tell you.
But you know what? You prevented frostbite. That's perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
And actually, it's interesting to just a quick aside, even in the summertime, if it's very cold out in the nighttime, you're going to be asleep. You're not going to be moving around. So your blood is not going to be pumping. You might risk developing frostbite while you're sleeping.
Wow.
Nose, ears. So it really is very beneficial to be able to wear your hat.
I always covered those, always. Yeah. Okay.
Mittens rather than gloves, because the fingers will help warm each other up if you can. Socks and sock liners, especially ones that will wick away moisture. Right. Wet, windy, cold air, just like hypothermia, those are the triad that will worsen frostbite.
Right.
Also, make sure that you have clothing that's fairly loose, not too restrictive, because you want to make sure that your blood is circulating to continue bringing warm blood to the extremities.
Yeah. When my feet were freezing, I mean, by freezing, probably not literally, but they felt freezing, I poured, because the Nalgene bottles can take boiling water. I boiled water, put it in my Nalgene bottle, and put it in my sleeping bag. And it really warmed up, and it was just amazing, the difference. Absolutely amazing.
That's the hiker's version of the old-fashioned hot water bottle.
Exactly. That's what it must be. I mean, this was all new to me, so yeah, it was a fantastic thing, I tell you, and it worked fine.
And that is, that's a great way to stay warm, stay out of trouble with hypothermia and with frostbite. Yeah. Okay.
And the last thing you say here is, apart from stay hydrated and well fed, you also say that keep moving. So once again, what do? You say keep moving. Hypothermia was keep still, but in this case, because it's a particular affected area, one particular area, you keep moving the rest of your body, because all you're actually trying to do then is literally unfreeze that water, aren't you?
Yes. So this one's a little tricky.
Right.
In frostbite, you definitely want to move, you want to exercise, because you are not hypothermic right now. You just have one area of the body that's cold, an extremity. So you want to move
localized.
The warm blood.
Okay. It's localized.
Yeah, the warm blood that's in your core system, you want to move it out to the extremities. And I just want to make a little bit of a clarification to the hypothermia that we talked about last week. Yeah. When you're cold stressed and right before you develop hypothermia, yes, that's when you exercise. That's when you want to start moving. If you're starting to shiver, start moving.
Right.
If you're just uncontrollable and you can't, that's when you have to sit. You have to get more layers on. You have to drink hot fluids and let the shivering take over.
Okay, that's interesting differences, and of course I wouldn't have understood that, because to me the two sounded relatively similar, but they're entirely separate. So I'm glad we did those in two separate sections then, Lynn. But that was very helpful to me. I mean, once again, I suspect most through hikers are not going to have an issue with frostbite. They may do with hypothermia, but if people are section hiking for a couple of weeks, or a couple of days rather, in December and January, knowing how cold it can be in certain places, you could easily expose yourself to it. So that was very useful. So we'll talk again next week, and thanks very much for that.
All right, terrific.
Take it easy. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope that, like me, you're learning something from these conversations. Lynn puts in plenty of research to supplement her already considerable knowledge, and she just wants to be able to help hikers if they ever need to know what to do. From my experience, I was a big fail in applying any of the things she's told us about. I owe her a great deal for stepping up and relishing the opportunity to help. It's more trail magic, isn't it? Next week, proving that touching the Appalachian Trail is not all about thru hikers and roughing it in the woods, I've got Judy Mikesell. Well, I hope to have Judy as my guest. We recorded a few weeks ago, and when I came to edit it, I realised that I'd recorded on the wrong microphone. What an idiot. Judy sounds great. It's just me. I've reached out to her and I hope that we can re-record in time. She has such a novel approach, and I think you're going to enjoy hearing from her. Now, having spent over a year reading my own books on the show, I'm honoured, but a little nervous, to be reading from Walking with Spring, the story that inspired thousands of Appalachian Trail thru hikers. Once you get used to Earl Schaefer speaking with a Brit accent, and by the way, me putting on some dreadful American accents for some of the characters, it is a darn good story. I should also let you know that you can get the book from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, so support them by buying it. One thing you should know is that there are 16 quite long chapters, so I'll probably be spending 2 weeks on each chapter. I'll be stopping at a natural break point, and then we'll restart the next week by reading the previous paragraph so that you know where you are. It should work out okay. Don't forget to listen to episode 2 of Returning to Katahdin this coming Monday. I'll see you all next week. Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer. Chapter 1, The Cloud-High Hills. There's a lone footpath along the crest of the Appalachian chain on the cloud-high hills so richly blessed with sun and wind and rain. Oglethorpe, southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, a mountain footpath extending 2,050 miles to Mount Katahdin in Maine. The board sign was battered and weather-beaten, its posts held up by a heap of gathered stones. A wintry wind gusted across the bleak and isolated summit, rustling brown leaves among the scraggly grass and muttering through the surrounding trees and brush. Midway of the clearing stood a tall white shaft of native marble, honouring the founder of the state of Georgia. Below the sunrise lay the Piedmont foothills deep in shadow. Southward and barely visible in the early daylight was Stone Mountain, near the city of Atlanta. To the west stretched the rolling countryside of northwestern Georgia and the little town of Jasper. I had come to Oglethorpe the previous day by way of the town, after a journey from Gainesville, first on foot and then on a ramshackle and overloaded bus. In Jasper, when asked which of the peaks on the eastern skyline was Oglethorpe, a man hesitated before drawling, "I don't rightly know, mister, but it's one of them tops out there." Along a gravel road in that direction, a logging truck stopped and the driver offered a ride. As we rattled along, a boy riding on the back mentioned that another hiker had started the week before, adding, "At least you won't need to worry about rattlesnakes. It's too early for them to be crawling." At the ridge crest, they directed me along the gravel road leading southward to the peak. Soon, a truck came lurching along and the driver asked if I had seen his foxhounds, which had gotten loose and were chasing deer. He gave me his phone number in case I saw them, but didn't say where I was to call from. Reaching the summit of Oglethorpe near sundown and finding it exposed to a cold and merciless wind, I backtracked to a rickety lean-to near a rickety fire tower and stayed there. The little black notebook said, "Got cold and blustery toward morning, hated like poison to get up." At least the scramble back to the summit warmed me up a little, and now the time had come. This was the threshold of my great adventure, long delayed by World War II and without my trail partner who had been killed on Iwo Jima. Those 4.5 years of army service, more than half of it in combat areas of the Pacific, without furlough or even rest leave, had left me confused and depressed. Perhaps this trip would be the answer. Late in 1947, I had seen an article in an outdoor magazine entitled The Long Trails Challenge. It said that no one was known to have hiked the entire trail in a continuous journey, though many had tried and such a trip might actually be impossible. Suddenly the old dream came alive. Why not walk the army out of my system, both mentally and physically, take pictures and notes along the way, make a regular expedition out of it? The trail would benefit at a time when it was at low ebb. My background of running the brush in all kinds of weather, based on the writings of such men as Nessmuk and the Grey Owl, should carry me through. Surely those years of trailing with Walter, when we first heard of the Appalachian Trail and wanted to walk it, would be an asset now. The launching of the Long Cruise was totally lacking in ceremony. I looked at the battered sign for the last time while the shrill wind seemed to be saying, "Get moving, Ridge Runner, the trail is calling and Katahdin is far away." My mountain troop rucksack was bulky and heavy as I slung it to my shoulders and started off. In it were an Air Corps survival tent, a Marine Corps poncho, a rain hat, a paper mill blanket, Marble Company match safe and compass and sheath knife, small hand axe, sewing kit, snakebite kit, mountain troop cook kit, and food for about a week. Clothing consisted of t-shirts, navy turtleneck, mountain cloth pants, wool cotton socks, and bird shooter boots. The only item not with me all the way was the tent. It stayed with me about a week. My plan was to move north with the spring, with the seasonal change, with no definite day-by-day goals, but never tarrying long as weather and terrain permitted. The early start from the south would allow a maximum of at least 6 months to reach and cross the timberline of New England. I hoped to maintain an average daily distance of close to 20 miles, but would settle for 15. Another advantage of the early start was the absence of snakes and bugs. Also in April, true first month of the year, the woods are at their finest, with the budding and leafing of trees, the blooming of flowers, the full-flowing streams and waterfalls, the rain-swept blue of the sky, and the little old retina, rugged and dependable, would record the beautiful scenes. Breakfast was cooked at the rickety lean-to, which did provide a fire pit and water from a nearby spring. Next stop was at the road crossing where the loggers had left me the day before. Here I managed a self-portrait with delayed action shutter release, showing a rear view of myself and pack with the lake at Connehaney Lodge in the background. The pack looks heavy, and it was, but not for long. My shoulders already were sore and some adjustments obviously were necessary. Ben Franklin, one of the wisest men who ever lived, once said, "Experience keeps a dear school, but fools learn in no other." The lesser fools are those who learn in a hurry. By rearranging the contents of the pack to cause a forward shift in weight and by discarding the large back pocket, it was possible to ease the burden. Long-distance backpacking is a rugged business and should be handled accordingly. Both bulk and weight are hindrances and must be kept to a minimum. My motto is, carry as little as possible, but choose that little with care. Meanwhile, a few wild flowers were blooming in sheltered spots, and sometimes a holly tree would contrast its brilliant red berries and glossy green leaves with the still leafless forest. Wild creatures were plentiful. Once a wild turkey flushed a few feet ahead, squawking and beating its wings, setting me back on my heels. Other times, quail, woodcock or grouse caused similar disturbances. The weather had been sunny, but now a buttermilk sky was moving in, foretelling rain. About noon, the trail crossed a road gap, probably the site of Southern's store, mentioned in early guidebooks, and entered a picnic area near a reservoir. Just then, 4 girls came strolling over a rise ahead. They were identically dressed in snowy blouses and long black new-look skirts, a very charming foursome. My t-shirt, grey pants, helter-skelter hair and sweaty face were definitely not as stylish. They passed quite sedately, but one of them muttered what sounded like hubba hubba. Beyond the rise, a family of 3 was setting out a picnic lunch. As I was passing, the man looked up and said casually, "Howdy, where you heading?" Just as casually, I replied, "To Maine." A poke in the solar plexus would have produced the same result. His jaw sagged and his eyes widened. When informed of my trek, he admitted he had never heard of the Appalachian Trail. Meanwhile, the lady just stood there and stared. Suddenly, she spoke. "You all mean to say you are walking all the way to Maine, over the mountains, all by yourself and carrying that thing?" The answer was obvious. "Yes, ma'am." She stared a moment longer, then shook her head and chuckled. "I'm glad I got sense, mister. I'm glad I got sense." The little boy said absolutely nothing. The man said, "Well, good luck to you." A while later, the trail passed Amicalola Falls, one of the highest east of the Rockies, totaling more than 500 feet of cascades and a sheer drop of more than 100 feet. The falls can be heard at least a mile away. I tried to crawl down to get a picture, but the thickets of rhododendron drenched with spray were too discouraging. A state park is located below and the approach is easier there. The trail from the falls to Springer Mountain is now an approach trail. The trail south of the falls has been abandoned. Toward evening, the trail came to Frosty Mountain Tower. So far, the way had been clearly marked. Suddenly, it wasn't. I was casting around like a busy hound when the warden on the tower noticed my antics and came out on the catwalk to shout directions. This helped a little, but the next few miles were disrupted by logging and marking was poor. At twilight, the path was upslope over rough and rocky terrain while the sky clouded over. Just before deep dark, when stopping was a must, I spotted a giant fallen chestnut tree held off the ground by limb stubs. I crawled under, wrapped in blanket and poncho, and fell into exhausted sleep, despite small sticks and stones underneath. Alas, no rest for the weary. About midnight, a shower of cold rain blew into my sanctuary. With fortitude born of desperation, I rolled out and hunted by flashlight for slabs of bark to shield the windward side, then at dawn packed hurriedly and hastened on, telling myself that the lady the day before had been absolutely right. Rain still fell as the lone expedition crossed the summit of Springer Mountain. This is the southernmost point in the Great Loop of the Blue Ridge, with the eastern arm including Mount Mitchell and the western arm the Great Smokies, the two joining again in southern Virginia. This loop encompasses the highest peaks and most massive ridges east of the Mississippi. At the time, my only concern was hunger and thirst. On the far slope was a good spring, and there I managed to cook the first meal since the previous noon. Cornmeal mush, with raisins and brown sugar and canned milk, tasted mighty good right then. Such food isn't fancy, but it sticks. The rain continued and fog rolled in, dense and muggy in low spots, shifting and swirling farther up as the trail came to a wire-enclosed area. Which way did the trail turn? Trees were moss-spotted, marking was faded. Because of mail difficulties at home, I had not received maps and data ordered from the Appalachian Trail Conference, and now had nothing but a road map to guide me. It showed the AT as a vaguely dotted line. I tried the northwesterly side and had gone at least 7 miles along the boundary when a travelled road appeared where none should have been. I was sitting on a bank and staring at my road map when a feeling of eyes upon me drew my attention up the road. It was a barefoot mountain boy, looking as though he wanted to run, but he came on bravely. Within a minute, we were friends. He said he reckoned the trail went on the other side of the game refuge, adding in his winsome drawl that his pappy was off to Elijah in his car or he would drive me back along the fire road. I thanked the little fella as he continued homeward, while memories came of my own boyhood among the rolling hills. Getting back to the trail was wearisome, especially on blistered and aching feet. Trying to favour the blisters resulted in jarring arches, knees and hip joints to the point where they joined the clamour. Every bump and twist on the rocky fire road was an added misery. Hiking had become an exquisite kind of torture. Something must be done. Since the weather was too cold and the footing too rocky to allow walking barefoot, the regular solution, the next best thing was to put sand in my boots and wear no socks until my feet toughened. This was painful at first, but calluses finally formed. Generous use of Quinsana foot powder also helped. Actually, I have learned since that sand is not necessary, that hiking without socks on a rugged trip is the best way to avoid foot troubles. Naturally, I do not expect this to be believed or adopted by others, but the Indian ways are usually the best in the woods. The rain had eased during my wrong-going, but resumed as the trek continued from the point of wrong turning. The fog was worse than ever, so there is no recollection of ascending the winding stairs or of entering the Chattahoochee National Forest, but I do recall stopping to drink at Rattlesnake Spring. Darkness caught me at Frying Pan Gap, just then a morass of mud and dripping trees. All but one of my matches were used before the fire finally burned. A pot of tea was all I could manage. That night was thoroughly miserable. The tent was poorly designed and almost useless. Finally came the dawn and another soon start. The rain continued as the trail alternated from woods roads to brushy timber. Once a truckload of men, probably a Forest Service crew on flood duty, came by as I was standing under a tree to lessen the brunt of an especially heavy downpour. They stared as though they didn't believe their eyes. At twilight I blundered into Cane Creek Gap and pitched camp. Fortunately, a pitch pine snag furnished fuel that would burn under such conditions, and I managed a cooking and drying fire. The little black notebook says that oatmeal with brown sugar and canned milk was on the menu. Meanwhile, a thunderstorm was approaching, and firewood had to be stockpiled. So I was out there hacking at the pine snag, which isn't easy under a poncho. Wind rose to a wail and thunder crashed and rolled, then lulled for an instant. Suddenly, out of the eerie silence came a screeching wail from close by in the woods. Something cold poured along my spine, and my hair rose up like a rooster hackles. A few seconds later, back by the fire, I realised it was only a wildcat and not a mountain lion. Those critters seemed to delight in such doings. Since a fire won't burn without wood, it was necessary to venture out again later. About midnight, the sky cleared and stars shone clear as gems on jet black velvet. A cold wind swept the mountain, and I shivered in spite of the fire. Such a night is guaranteed to instill a profound respect for the power of nature and the vastness of the universe. Once, in the wee small hours, a line from Kipling went through my mind. Who has smelled a wood smoke at twilight, or seen the campfire burning, who is quick to read the noises of the night?